Welcome everyone to Chart Chat for this lovely month of April. We're excited to have folks joining us from around the world to have a great conversation today, all about the big book of dashboards. And I'm excited to be here with my co-hosts. Let's do a quick round robin for introductions. I'm Amanda Makulec. I am the Executive Director for the Data Visualization Society and a Health Data Visualization Designer based out of Washington, D.C. Steve, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Steve Wexler, founder and principal of Data Revelations, author of The Big Picture, and one of three authors of The Big Book of Dashboards.
Over to
Shall I
you.
pass the baton? Jeff.
Jeff.
Jeff Shaffer. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Unifun, Adjunct Professor at the University of Cincinnati, where I teach data visualization, and also one of the co-authors of the Big Book of Dashboards.
And so by process of elimination, it comes to me. My name's Andy Cotgreave. Hello, everybody. I'm Technical Evangelist at Tableau and co-author of the Big Book of Dashboards. And I'm in Seattle this week, and I've already lost my voice. So bear with me through the next hour.
It's going to be great, Andy. So if you haven't been with us before, today is Chart Chat Live. We come to you live streaming on YouTube so that you can join into the conversation. It's more than just chit chat. It is Chart Chat. And we're excited to dive into a few deep dive topics related to our focus today, which is around the Big Book of Dashboards 5 years later. What has been sticky about the things that these wonderful three co-authors shared in their book, what has evolved in the thinking around data viz, and we want to hear your comments and questions. So if you would like to share, feel free to go ahead and add comments. We'll show you quickly just how to do that momentarily, but we welcome your comments, suggestions, feedback, and if there's something that you loved about the Big Book of Dashboards, if you have a copy yourself, like I do sitting here. If you have a copy of the book and have enjoyed it and have any feedback, comments, or praise for the authors or ideas, feel free to throw those in the comments as well. As we think about what the Big Book of Dashboards looks when you pull it up on Amazon, a trusted resource for building an effective dashboard. And having read the Big Book of Dashboards myself and having used it for a book club within a team in the past and in other contexts, it is a really great resource to go to in terms of examples and concrete ways to visualize business data. So while I know that we tend to skew and move into various different topics and areas in Chart Chat and have covered a lot over the past couple of years, today we'll be talking a lot about those business dashboards and about the ways in which we can create and build effective dashboards that actually communicate and help people answer questions. As we go ahead and talk about today, I went and looked through some of the Amazon reviews for the Big Book of Dashboards, which was a fun adventure. And there were a lot of really nice things people had to say about it being a great reference book, lots of examples. But what I loved is someone commented that it's more than just pictures. It's really about the conversational narrative that delivers real value. And for me, that's a big part of what Chart Chat has become, is this continued conversation about the hows and whys of the decisions we make as we build and create data visualizations. And the hope that by having those conversations, some of the same kinds of conversations that these three authors had as part of their writing process, that we're able to widen the conversation around why and how we make different design decisions and help add visibility to those things for folks who may be starting out in this field or thinking about how to make better data visualizations and dashboards. So I'm excited to continue that conversation today. We encourage you to disagree. If you have things you disagree with about things we're talking about or saying, something to chime in on when Andy dives into his hot button topic that we'll get into shortly, and to be able to go ahead and have a conversation with you as the folks who are joining us live today. If you're looking to join us, you'll see that there is the option to go ahead and join on the live chat panel below here on YouTube or on the right of the stream. And you should be able to pop out the chat separately if you want to be able to watch in full screen and have the chat also floating as an additional window. So in case you're new to joining Chart Chat here instead of our previous platform on Zoom, just a quick note about how you can go ahead and you can share those things. All right, so our agenda for today, we are going to talk about three big topics that each of our co-authors has taken the lead on, and we'll share some insights around, and then we'll chat as we always do. First, Andy Cotgreave is going to talk to us about the definition of a dashboard. Andy, that's going to be an exciting conversation, right? You're going to challenge us all to think differently.
Yep.
Second, we're going to go ahead and chat with Jeff and the rest of the team around bands. big blank numbers, fill in which different A you'd like to use, and how they've evolved over time, and things like fonts and contrast and the ways in which they influence how we see and use these big ass numbers. And then Steve will talk a little bit about collaboration and feedback loops, how we go ahead and work together, and how working together helps us evolve designs in different ways and directions. And as time allows, at the very end, we'll have a quick lightning round talking about each of our favorite dashboard examples. Hard to pick a favorite, but a great dashboard example we've each picked, and why we like them. And would welcome you chiming in again in the conversation, sharing your favorite examples as we get to that section in the chat. You also can always go ahead and join us in the after party and share more of your ideas and comments. So excited to go ahead and have those of you who can stick around join us there. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand over our first section over to Andy and kick off our conversation with these three wonderful co-authors. Andy, would you like to kick us off with talking about the definition of a dashboard for those who may be perhaps newer to that topic or curious about how that's changed over time?
Yeah, excellent. Oh, right. Well, I'm excited to kick this off. So finding a dashboard was a very good experience and a core part of the book. We started with a relatively short definition, and as the time passed, as we were writing the book, the definition got longer, and it got longer. It kind of shortened a bit, but then it got really long because we had all these case studies. We were trying to create this single, all-encompassing definition that captured everything. And then with just a few weeks before publication, we were like, you know what, screw this. We're going to keep it short. So the definition just plummeted down to something really short. And our definition 5 years ago, as we published it, was a dashboard is a visual display of data used to monitor conditions and or facilitate understanding. And like the modern art masterpiece that was Duchamp's urinal, where he was saying anything can be art, you could say that this means anything can be a dashboard. And over 5 years, I've kind of become a bit more hardline about that definition. And I really own it. And I hope Steve and Jeff do too, but we can obviously come back to talk about that at the end of this little section. And so it's vague, right? Now, what then happened? So we sent a copy, excuse me, we sent a copy of the book to Stephen Few. We sent a copy to him because he's the first person we mentioned in the acknowledgements of the book. Stephen Few and his early books had huge influence on both Steve, Jeff, and I. And Steve was very gracious to write an email in reply. He said, overall, I think you provided a useful addition to the field of data visualization, which few of the books in the last 10 years have done. So thank you for the praise. Publicly, he didn't choose to say that. Instead, he chose to write 1,000 words, absolutely destroying the definition of dashboards that we had put in the book. Thank you, Steve. As a side note, it was a slightly strange period because 6 weeks before that, he'd written 2,000 words, destroying the eye tracking research that Amy Alberts had led at Tableau and that I had assisted with. He accused the entire stuff as being written by somebody in marketing, which was, I will say, incredibly patronizing, but actually Amy Alberts has been a researcher in the field of eye tracking for over 15 years. 6 weeks before that, he also destroyed lollipop charts, which was a chart type I named and sort of popularized in the Tableau community back in 2011. It was a strange summer period that I couldn't help thinking personally attacked during. But that aside, he did not like our definition at all. I'm still proud of it, right? It's short and vague. And the reasons for that are myriad, because as we went through the book, what we realized was that the definition is not important. It doesn't matter. You don't need to get tied up by this stuff. You need to think about your goal. Do you have the right information on a display, delivered and tailored for the particular audience that needs that information in that display type, and delivered in the right form factor, the right medium, so that the audience can get the information they need in the shortest time possible? If you want to call that a dashboard or a purple cat or a top hat, I don't really care. Whatever you're doing as you do your analytics, you've got to have the goal in mind. There are another aspect that really changed or strengthened my concept of this definition is how technology has evolved over time. And in fact, Tim, you've just asked, oops, I'm just going to try and get Tom's correct. Tim's just asked, how has Tableau changed in the last few years in relation to what went in the big book of dashboards? And I think what I'm about to show you kind of covers that, because I use Tableau Mobile every day. Right, I monitor my Strava activity and my Fitbit step counts using Tableau Mobile. So when I click on the Tableau Mobile logo in the top on the screen, this is the page I get. This is my favorites page on Tableau Online. Really, I don't look at the bottom two dashboards very much. It's the top 4 panes that I'm interested in. And what have we got here? On the bottom row, I've got a link to a dashboard, my walking tracker, and I've got a link to another dashboard, my Fitbit tracker. Above that, we've got metrics. Metrics are pretty much one of my favorite features that Tableau have released in the last 5 years, because, I mean, well, for a start, it's a band, right? I mean, look, this is literally a band. It tells me, have I walked more than 4.4K every day this year? If I do, then I'll have walked 1,000 miles. And am I over 10,000 steps, right? So what is this? What is this page? Is this a dashboard? I do not care, right? But it is my homepage where I can monitor the things that are important to me. I look at the bands, and then I can click on the link to a dashboard if I need to afterwards. So I think, you know, Tim, that's sort of my reflection on how the technology has evolved in Tableau to sort of further support the vague definition. The other aspect is, so I'll go back, the other thing that I think has happened over the 5 years is some people say, but your definition doesn't help people who are new to the field, right? You know, it's almost flippant in its vagueness. And I think that's fair. That's a fair accusation. Something that's happened in the last 5 years is Nick DeBarat has emerged on the scene. He inherited Stephen Few's courses, and his new book, Practical Dashboards, sets out a taxonomy of the myriad different display types that have been called dashboards or could be called dashboards. And I've got a lot more to say about taxonomies, but I won't for now. But I think this is a really good an alternative way of sort of extending the definition into various different pathways. So go check out Nick's book. Finally, what is a dashboard? Well, in 2019, 2 years after the book came out, I went to San Francisco, and with RJ Andrews, we went to the Wells Fargo head office, and there's a stagecoach. And what's a dashboard? You know what? This is a dashboard. It's the board of wood that stops water dashing onto the rider when he or she is riding the horse and carriage. These were also for visual relevance put onto early cars, and then somebody put a gauge on it, and that became a dashboard. So, you know what? It's just a word from Victorian era transport. That's why I like our short definition of a dashboard, just 15 words, and that's where I'll stop. So I am interested in your comments. So Steve and Jeff, how have you reflected on the definition over the last 5 years?
Jeff, why don't you go first, if you don't mind?
Well, a lot of your comments there, Andy, hit home. I always tell my students in class when I kind of give them the definition of the dashboard and kind of walk through a similar story, I say I've never been in a business meeting where I put up an image of a dashboard and show a group and talk about it, and somebody raises their hand and says, "That's really interesting, but is that really a dashboard?" Nobody's ever asked that question. You know, nobody's ever even asked, you know, from a taxonomy standpoint, even what it does in that sense. So I think there's the real world application of things. I don't think users care, right? On the other side, I think, and I'm not one for hard definitions, naming of charts, but I think there is some use to names of charts from think a practical standpoint. If I'm going to go to Google, how do I build this chart? You know, what do I have to call it something, right? And so people call things, and I've done it myself. I've called things names that aren't really right. When I first created curvy lines in Tableau, it was Sankey style slope graphs. Is like, well, what does that mean? It's it's just curvy line slope graphs is what they were, right? So if I'm going to try to figure out how to make a barbell chart in Tableau, do I search barbell, dumbbell, connected dot plot, gap chart? There's 10 or 12 different names that people might call it. And so I think there is some use to having standardized definition of things. I'm just not one to have fixed definitions. I think, our words and our definitions change over time. And I guess the last point I would say is that that's happened in the stagecoach, right? Became a odometer to read my first car that I drove, I monitored gas and speed. Today, if you've been in a Tesla or even a Toyota, these days you have a flat screen that controls everything, right? You can control the volume and get a map and zoom in and zoom out and change your audio sources and all these different things. And so it's much more than monitoring conditions these days, all at your fingertips, right? Like just push a button, it changes something. So I think just like that has changed over the years, I think a business dashboard changed over the years.
Yeah. How about you, Steve?
Amanda, it looked like you were trying to say something there for a second. Oh.
I think she's on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Just inviting you to go ahead and speak up. That's all.
Okay, thank you. So I really like Nick DeBarra and think people should follow him. And he's open-minded, has great ideas and and he's nurturing of conversations where I think, as you kind of pointed out, Andy, Stephen Pugh might be a little brittle and dogmatic. That presentation, the 13 types of displays, unfortunately all described as a dashboard. He gave that presentation at the Tableau conference in 2019. And I too don't respond well to formal taxonomies, nor I think a while back he put together a whole decision tree about when is it okay to not have the value axes start at 0, and if this, etc. But when we started discussing what's really important, it was managing the audience expectations. So I don't know if it's that important that we understand the taxonomy and everyone's fluent in it, but if someone is expecting a one-page summary, curated results, and instead you're giving them this multifaceted display, they're going to be disappointed, or vice versa. So understanding, having a good sense of what it is that the audience wants and needs and how you're going to present it, I couldn't agree with that more. So that's one of the good things that came out of that conversation with him.
Taxonomy, I'm just going to show her, I don't think I've ever shown this slide publicly because it wasn't really designed for public sharing. It was something I threw together for internal things. But taxonomies, I think, are really interesting as you go through your life, right? So apologize, I've used pictures of myself to illustrate this. I think my experience of taxonomy is particularly of charts. When you don't know what's going on in this field, everything is unclear. The world, they're just charts or dashboards, right? And then as you get into the field, that this taxonomy is good God, that taxonomy is bringing this absolute incredible clarity. It's like, oh wow, there's rules and there's paths to follow. But then as your wisdom increases, you realize that you start to see all the blurry edges around the taxonomies, and then at some point you can unleash yourself from the constraints of the taxonomy. So, yeah, I think what Nick's doing is really good, and I also agree we should be following that.
Your optometrist appointment, is that better or worse? Better or worse?
Oh man. Didn't really expect to share that today, but there you go, I did.
I was going to add, somebody asked a question about Tableau, and this is interesting because I think Stephen Pugh has a point here in that he talks about in Tableau, a definition of a dashboard is just a blank canvas that you can put anything on. And Daniel kind of said that for non-native English speakers, that's what he thought a dashboard is. So that is interesting to me. Is it's very broad, right? It's just a blank canvas that could be any data visualization, and that's probably true there.
I think one of the things that strikes me is talking among experts about how we define dashboard is one thing and how we use taxonomies. On the other side is how that enables conversations with clients. And oftentimes if we're building dashboards, we're building them for clients towards a certain set of requirements. And I was struck by, Galen had made the comment that he has gotten pushback, particularly on the definition of dashboard versus report. And part of that to me seems like it's expectation setting. And it goes back to that hierarchy or that taxonomy that Nick had put together around different things that can be called dashboards. And if I say to someone, you're going to get a dashboard, some people are going to think it's going to be interactive and updated hourly or have some expectation of frequency with which the data is updated versus a report that may be more static or produced on a certain cadence. And I'm curious if you all have thought about that context outside of the how we use this definition as practitioners, but using it with clients.
You're on mute, Andy. You could.
So yeah, so the client aspects I can't comment to, but you just triggered memories of how we were trying to define this during writing the book, because we were like, well, hang on, we've got like a single screen chart that might appear in a call center, right? You know, that is a monitoring display on a screen at the far end of a room. It's a dashboard, right? But it's not interactive. It updates every hour. We've got one that goes on a piece of paper. Well, that doesn't update, but it's still a monitoring display you can print out. Or we've got all the interactive ones, the ones that update, the ones that don't, the ones that you can explore, and the ones that explain. And I remember during the process, it's like the definition was growing and growing and growing to encompass all these possible things. And it was like, you know what? It's too hard. We're just going to make it vague. Sorry, no comment on the client aspect then.
I mean, Steve, Jeff, you both worked with client-facing projects. Thoughts from you?
I think Steve was right on point. It's like setting the expectation up front. And, we always talk about, who's the audience, what's the message, what's the medium, how are you going to deliver it? And if you set that stage for who's going to read this, what's the purpose of it, what do they need it to do? I can tell you war stories myself. The complaints dashboard that's in the book, it's rich, interactive, where you can click on a state and filter. And yet for the first 6 months, I was sitting in a large conference room where somebody from the legal department was bringing in 50 printouts, clicking on each state and printing each state and bringing it to the meeting. And it was like, well, there's a large screen TV right there. We can just click on the state and everybody can see it. And so it takes a while for users to appreciate that, right? And so I think Zoom meetings have actually helped that. I would say that was one thing coming out of the pandemic is we're probably printing a lot less than we used to because we're all on Zoom sharing screens and interacting real time.
It's an interesting kind of shift in terms of access, and it makes me think of all the comments you hear about, can I get that data as an Excel file or as a PDF once someone builds the interactive dashboard anyways? Speaking of shared sorry, Steve, you want to have one more?
I was just going to say things that we've kind of learned along the way and going with the printing and things like that, and learning from workshop attendees and things they've done in their organization. We'll have a discussion of how many people use dark background dashboards, and then not that many hands go up. And then a discussion of, well, why would you not use them? Oh, because people are going to start, when they print them out, it's using all this ink or all this toner. And I know of at least one organization that started creating dark background dashboards intentionally, knowing that the CFO would go crazy about the wastefulness. And he sent out an ultimatum saying, people are not allowed to print dashboards anymore. All this was done to get people to interact with them. So with this rather manipulative approach to this, but in this case, I guess the ends justified the means.
Interesting. Well, thinking towards other kind of language and definitions and talking about big things in the book. Next, we wanted to tackle and talk about big ass numbers, big blank numbers. We'll let Jeff go ahead and fill us in on all the ways we can expand out that acronym and some of the ways in which bands have been a big part of how data visualization and dashboards have evolved over the last 5 years.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah. Bands are an interesting term. I'll kind of discuss the history of it, but when we talk about it, it really has to do with, font contrast or, typography hierarchy. I like to call this section "Who Gives a Font?" But let's dive in a little bit to, and I'm not going back historically. It'd be interesting for somebody like, R.J. Andrews to weigh in on this. The first time somebody in history used a large print number in a data visualization. I can say in graphic design, it's been around for a long time. And when we talk about influences, we talk about in the book, steal like an artist, taking things from our book and using one of the people that I have taken a lot from is Nicholas Felton, a graphic designer, kind of turned into the data viz field and technology. And he did for 10 years a thing called the Feltron report. And going back all the way to 2005. I mean, think about your career in data. What were you doing in 2005? This was his first annual report, and you can already see from way back then that he was using these really large numbers. And as I look at his work, he did this report for 10 years. As you move through the years, you really start to see his style come to life. It's a very monochromatic design, which I love. I think it's timeless. These really big numbers that you see he uses over and over again, the grid design that he uses, the way he uses white space or negative space in his design, really kind of pops and comes to life. I couldn't help but put a pie chart on there, given the discussion that was happening on Twitter this morning. So I had to find one and throw that in there. But in his designs, these big numbers, and by the way, I wouldn't call these, key performance indicators at any point. I don't think anybody would say, he has a number on here, 1 tooth lost by cat, or, miles that he's driven. That's not a key performance indicator in any measure, but it's something, he's monitoring. This was a quantified self project. He's monitoring things about himself, and he uses this big text to call these things out that are interesting. Toward the end of the project in 2014, I see in my eye a fully developed style that I love and I pull from. And this is where I take a lot of inspiration from my work, where I tried to emulate as I was developing my style. And you'll see this in dashboards that I do. When I was working with this early on, I think I was playing around with this in Excel. Yeah. I was just trying to create, simple charts with simple colors and these big numbers to call things out. And that kind of developed as time went on, to what ended up in the book in 2017 to where I ended up. So I kind of followed that path myself, I guess, over a few years, and pulling a lot of things from that. So what are bands? After we published the book, Steve wrote a great blog post. I think it was in praise of, big ass numbers or something like that. And Steve coined that term, bands. If you're in a group that term, could be offensive, feel free to put any A number in there that you like, annotated numbers, awesome numbers, assertive numbers. You can pick your A. I've heard people use big awesome numbers. They like that one. But they're just big numbers, right? What is the purpose of just having a big number? I think this goes back to our typography hierarchy that, we think about these in our design of a data viz or a dashboard. We'll have something that's important, something that's highlighted that we want to get across, and then other information that maybe are smaller. And that is really, if you go back to this course metrics dashboard, that's what I did here, right? And by the way, the bands aren't blue. If they were, it'd be the only thing you'd look at, right? So other things are the color that you use, or the bolding that you use, or the font size, they all play together. It would probably be very difficult if you were using color, bold, size, fat font. It literally would be the only thing on the page that you would see. So it's also about, complementing these things and putting them together. As it relates to dashboards, this is a dashboard Steve was working on, the last dashboard that we included in the book. And this is where it ended up right before publication. One of the last pieces that Steve added in on that dashboard was bands, the big important numbers across the top. In this case, a headline, if you will. And so it kind of reads across the top as the headline for the newspaper, and then your details are below. The other thing that we talk about is using them as color legends. It's a great opportunity to set in stone that no matter where you look on the dashboard, fees are always blue, potential is always green. Fees blue, potential green. Billable fees blue, potential green. And so it adds, you're now decluttering your dashboard because you can remove a color legend. Same thing here. Closed complaints are one color, open complaints are another color. And today, this version of this dashboard, the bands are actually across the top and much, much bigger. But this is the version from our book. So I love that aspect of it, of using it as a color legend. I was debating whether to put this in and just, this will take a minute or two just to show you. Andy referenced Amy's research in eye tracking. And while we were writing the book, they wanted to do eye tracking around dashboards, specifically around bands. And so their question in the research, one of their studies, was where to put the bands. Does it matter if you put the bands, these big numbers, at the top of your dashboard or at the bottom of your dashboard? Does the reader's eye navigate differently across the page? Now, what you're about to see on both of these left and right-hand side is a collective group of eyes, thousands of people looking at the dashboard. Where do their eyes go? And as you see a screen turn white, that is where the collective eyes are looking. So I hope the animation is working for you. It appears to be. On the left-hand side, you'll see right across the top, they're reading the bands. Not so much on the right-hand side. They're still starting at the top left of your dashboard, and they eventually get to your bands at the bottom, but not as much. And there's a side-by-side. You'll see the bands at the bottom just don't get the same eyeballs as people are starting to read the dashboard. The other one they did was the size of the bands. What about a small number versus a larger number? And this is one of the things that Stephen Few called out. He said, of course, people look at large numbers. Well, it might be obvious, but I don't know that people were doing it. And so I think calling out that we should do it more, that if you want the user to see these KPIs or an important number, does making them large matter? And I think it's obvious, yes, that they do. The larger the number, even in the middle of the dashboard, calls the eye a lot more than the smaller numbers. And if you put what appears to be a naked human being on your dashboard, I guess people will look at that too. So people look over there as well. So from a practical standpoint, the only thing as I look back 5 years now that I wish we maybe would have talked about more was context of those numbers, that a single number doesn't necessarily mean context. If I put something up and I'm counting them, in Nicholas Felton's example, yes, he drove 16 trips in a taxi. Okay, is that good or is that bad? Is that normal? Is that something? It's just an interesting factoid. For your business dashboard, I think the user would say, I don't know, is it good or bad? And without a spec, without having a target or without having a defined measure, if this is the target, yes, we're doing great because all of our points ended up in there. But that really depends, graphically. And so you kind of ask questions. Is the 16 growing? Is it more or less? What is the trend of it? Is it within our threshold of where we need to be? And I think that's kind of where that leads to context. I think Adam McCann did a great job in visualizing KPIs. He shows direction of those KPIs. Are they moving up? Are they moving down? Or over time as a spark line, or highlighting them with a glow of when something is changing or moving. Another one is Luke Stanke, who did a KPI design ideas and puts target lines, a bar chart with a target or a spark line or an area chart in there, I think provides context to these big numbers. And Anya did a real-time dashboard of a call center. And as things that are important change, if they really move, she highlights them with this lighting as an attentive attribute to say, hey, you're paying attention to all these numbers, but you should really pay attention to this one number that really changed in context. And the last one, some band design ideas from Kevin Flairledge. All of these are available on their Tableau public page. They were all done in Tableau, so you can hunt those down. We'll provide links when in the YouTube video. But that's all I have on the topic of bands.
Jeff, if you don't mind, can you click back to Adams real quick? I think one of the things that strikes me and that has come up in some conversations is how do you make sure that any additional kind of small encodings you're putting on something like a band are accessible? And what I like a lot about Adams is he's double encoded a lot of information, written things out in text, and had it colored or otherwise kind of alerting someone, which is a really nice feature in terms of how he's designed some of the bands that he has. Because I know that is one of the things that comes up with the color legend pieces, right? Tim had said, a color legend is just inspired, right? Like what a great idea in terms of what that looks like. But as we're thinking about that, I think bringing a lens of accessibility to that in terms of not letting that be the only place you can figure out how that color is being used is really important too. So I think that's a great call out. Steve, you want to go ahead and chime in on bands?
Yeah, and a couple of things I'm going to share about it, but I think my main gig these days is I'm a professional chart looker-atter, or professional dashboard looker-atter, and people will ask me to critique and is this the best way to show this? What do you think of this, etc. And I will ask people, hey, I'm looking at your dashboard right now, and as your intended audience, should I be celebrating or hyperventilating? Because are things great or are things awful? Because I have no idea. So when you have something, 23 new customers this quarter, is that good? Or is it way below where we want to be? Or is it way above? So just having that number there. But at the same time, I'm going to celebrate something in a minute. And you're going to go, well, wait a second, you're being hypocritical because those are just numbers. So let me share my screen for a moment. And so this is a tiny portion of a wonderful dashboard that Jeff made, I guess, in 2014, The Quantified Self. You know the TV show How I Met Your Mother? Well, here's how I met my fellow author. And who is making stuff like this? And I think this is the first like Sankey and Tableau, but I want to focus on this thing that I just said, well, don't do stuff like that. But why does this thing work so well here? And that is, I just want to look at these things at the bottom. Well, these are just fun facts. There's no, oh my God, Jeff hasn't answered nearly enough emails, or he's answered more assignments than anybody else, or more assignments than he did last time. None of that was the goal of this. And if we look at some of it's interesting to see, hey, all of these are just, big numbers, interesting numbers. Gee, that's interesting. Gee, what's happening? Oh, now I'm seeing this within context of what's going on. So if it's just fun facts or interesting things, great. Just have a big number and use some, design techniques. If it's, hey, I need to understand the context of this. Am I above or below? And here's a wonderful thing that Andy did a while back. He was just very frustrated by this poll tracker in the UK, and which is, gee, now I'm just looking at a bunch of numbers that are color-coded, and came up with this, which I thought was, oh my God, this is just great. I can see how things are trending, what's the changes are over time. They're still big numbers, and I can say the Conservative Party has 42%, but I can see it relative to the other things. So that's my way of suggesting I'm not being hypocritical. If they're fun facts, great. But if they're KPIs, what Jeff pointed out, there probably has to be something else, like what Luke did, I thought was particularly effective.
I'd forgotten I'd even done that. Do you know, we've been in this game so much. I was like, God, did I do that? Yeah.
I bet you every one of us will go look at something and go, hey, that's really quite good. Oh my gosh, I made it.
Yeah. I'll just go back to metrics. This echoes. This echoes a little bit what Amanda said, right? The information on here is double encoded. Oh, hang on, let's get that on the right screen. So we have the color changes from green or red, but it's a color vision deficiency suitable green or red. The text tells me whether I am above, but you can see that relative to the line as well. This is part of the reason I think it's a great feature. But another reason, which might segue a little bit into Steve's section, is that the dev team did a lot of work with the community, a lot of work with Adam McCann and others to be like, look, you've been out there learning how these things work, and that's what we want to implement. So they strove really hard to do these things correctly. So so another, I love metrics. I just love them. I will always shout that process.
Yeah. Is there anything you all would have done differently in the book? Kind of thinking back to how you spoke about, wrote about, or illustrated bands in the book 5 years later?
We just talked about them as big numbers. We didn't define it, and either the word bands are not in the book actually. So that's probably one of them. I think we probably would go back and define it and talk about and give some of these examples. But we talked around it, right? We used the big numbers and we talked about them in the chapters.
Hey kids, this is why you should come to our workshops, because all those things that aren't in the book are covered in the workshops. So
there you go. So one of the last topics we wanted to talk about today was about collaboration. Steve, you want to chat with us a bit about collaboration and what that journey of book writing looked like and how your thinking has evolved?
Yeah, the people had asked, well, how do three people write a book together? Didn't you get into fights? I wouldn't say we ever got into fights. We had great debates and discussions, and all of which, for me at least, had me rethinking, oh God, maybe Jeff's right, maybe Andy's right. And in the book, when we're discussing different scenarios, if one of us kind of disagreed with this ultimate solution that someone came up with, we'd have the you know the opposing argument in there saying, well, I'm not really sure if that's the best way, or maybe you should consider this. But I'm now seeing it is essential that you get feedback from your stakeholders. And in fact, you should probably turn them into collaborators. And I'm going to show several examples of where, I hadn't thought about it this way. I'm glad I discussed this with you, because I think ultimately the solution that we've now both come up with is better than what I was going to be doing on my own. So folks that have attended our workshop know this example. How do you show people who really like us a product versus people who don't like a product, and all the shortcomings of this. And this, in fact, was the whole catalyst for the big book of dashboards, this particular data set. And there are discussions of what's wrong with it. There's issues with color. There's issues with not things being color coded by ranking as opposed to actual performance. And ultimately, this is what we presented as the top portion in the book. Big thing to look at is the bars is, hey, here's how we did this period is the bar, and the vertical line is the previous period. And the little red dot just means, hey, this is statistically different from the previous period. So bar is current period, vertical line is previous period. Well, we then would have a discussion of, well, maybe, here's another way that you might do it, this distributed slope graph, and discuss that. Since then, I've become really enamored of, or is it enamored with, or smitten by the connected dot plot or the barbell chart. And I remember speaking with workshop attendees and saying, if I were doing this thing now, if the book were coming out now, instead of this, I do this. And to my surprise, a lot of people said, no, this one's a little tricky. And the first person who said, well, wait a second, isn't this really compact? It's really easy to see where the gaps are. And there's another advantage. Not only can I show the current period versus the previous period, but I could have a vertical line, which is what my target is, which would have been hard to do on the other one. And they said, and this is when it's important that you listen to your stakeholders. They said, it's hard for me to see which dot is the current period and which is the previous period. I know they're color coded. The dark blue is the current period and the gray is the previous period, but finding where is the gray dot ahead or behind. And it said, so you're having trouble seeing which is now and which is previous, but with the bar and vertical line, it was a simple read. They said, yes. That night, this before part 2 of the workshop, said, how about this? And it kind of begat my fascination with the comment chart. And they went, oh, that is such an easy read. So by the way, if we were, if we could, I'd love to have a comment chart in the big book of dashboards. And clearly anyone who has attended the workshop knows we now discuss comment charts. But that came from, oh, they're not seeing this thing that I'm seeing. What can I do to make it easy to see where you were and where you went? And comment chart. Other things, this particular example where we have people do it in the workshop kind of begat the "you are welcome to disagree with me" slide. This was, how would you visualize this? Percentage of people who enjoyed being in nature before they took a course and after they took a course, and only 15% before and 97% after, and spend more time outdoors. This is one hell of an outdoor action course, whatever it is, given these numbers after the event. And I said, well, this is kind of my go-to. It was my go-to at the time. Jeff has had an influence, has kind of encouraged me not to have such big circles on things. They tend to obscure. Stephen Few had that effect on me. So I would say this is probably how I would do it now. And this is after attendees come up with their way of looking at stuff. This is the slope graph. and remember looking at something Andy Cotgreave put together of a distributed slope graph. And I decided, oh, I'm not just going to make a distributed slope graph. I'm going to make a distributed area chart. And I said, isn't this great? Look, we started at 15 and now we ended at 97. And it's really easy to compare how low this is with how high this is. It's great. It's great. It's great. Next morning, someone says, I'm not buying this thing. I said, well, what do you mean? And I'm really glad she spoke up, said, I was confused by it because I thought you were asking me to compare the areas of these weird shapes. And she was looking at the trapezoid. She wasn't looking at the start and the end, and went, wow, that's a really good point. So instead of this, how about this? And she said, oh, that's great. I have no problem understanding that. But I needed that feedback from the audience to go, this thing that is so clear to you is confusing me. So sorry about that. One more thing, which is just the getting feedback, and this is kind of a little heads up for something that's going to be happening in June. There's been a big project that started last fall, spearheaded by Seth Godin, called the Carbon Almanac, a book of facts and action things that people can do around climate change. And I was one of many contributors to it. And one thing that came up amongst the people making charts and graphs is, well, how would you show this factoid? 44% of methane emissions come from agriculture, and within agriculture, 67, almost more than 2/3 comes from enteric fermentation. And enteric fermentation is a euphemism for cow or bovine flatulence. So this is what was kind of the original version of this thing, and it's a pretty god awful chart on this, and pie charts have to add up to 100%. This is clearly the numbers there doesn't match this, but what they're saying, trying to say, hey, this chunk of 44.1% and the slice doesn't start at midnight. This is just killing me here. So this is my first attempt, and I'm looking at it now and going, well, this is not so great. But for me, it was like, I totally got it. Okay, 44% is agriculture, and of that agriculture, and I got pushback going, well, this really isn't clear, and people explain why. So I started experimenting with things and saying, is this a little clearer? How does this work? What's the thing that you're not seeing? And eventually came up with this pairing, which everyone went, man, this is just totally nailing it. Okay, I'm seeing a little less than half is from agriculture, and I'm now seeing within agriculture 2/3 is coming from enteric fermentation. But needed that back and forth with the ultimate audience and with fresh eyes and people who aren't so steeped in it. And anytime I'm doing anything which is not for myself, I pretty much get some other people to look at it and suggest improvements. So I encourage people to do the same. And best yet, don't ask your peers, ask the person who's going to be using it if they understand it.
Look at that boomerang back to a bar chart, Steve.
Boomerang
back to a bar chart. Any quick thoughts, Jeff or Andy, about collaboration and your experience working together on the book and since then?
I just echo. I mean, I remember I shook hands with Steve and Jeff behind the keynote stage in Las Vegas 2016, I think. We were just about to go on stage and do the Zen Master announcement. And, you embark on a book with two people you don't know that well. You think, well, are we going to tug in the same direction or are we going to disintegrate? And for all the intensity of the conversations, it was amazing working with these two because we always had the same goal. So I think we looked out as a trio on that book. Really good. And I think, were we to do the book again, we might put a lot more of that commentary in the book than actually appeared in the first edition.
I think some people struggle with how to find the collaborators, and Steve reached out just with an email. That's how we started our relationship. But Tableau user groups for those of you in the Tableau community, fan mail to somebody. But in your company, just like Steve said, get in front of the people who are going to use the dashboard or the visualization in general. One of the things I like, I know it's hard, but stand over them and watch them use it. put it in front of them and then watch them use it and don't say anything. And it'll be frustrating, right? You'll be like, just click on that box. It's right there. Don't you see it? And, I think it'll just bring to light what they're looking at, what they're doing. That might be another way to do it.
Jeff, I want to amplify something with that, which is when instead of, let's say you're coming up with a dashboard, instead of presenting to your audience what it is and how to use it, just say, hey, here's this thing. What do you understand? What do you get? And what doesn't make sense to you? And it's a great way to determine where, maybe, oh gosh, I have to do a little scaffolding here, a little helper here, something that explains this. And realize you only have one shot at this, because once they know what the thing is, they can't unknow knowing they know. Sound like Donald Rumsfeld here.
Well, I think I've used just even like short examples of, can you answer this question with a dashboard, and kind of, can you find that answer? And if I've designed around that question, it lets me figure out if the wayfinding is good enough for someone else to find the answer.
Wait, I got to just do one thing, Andy, because it's an opportunity to make fun of Andy, and who doesn't want to do that?
Bring it up.
The Andy, the handshake or whatever was in fact 2015.
Oh, was it?
And you initially said no.
Did I?
Yes. We had to convince you to do this. Yes.
I can't remember that.
And I have the whole thing, I'm trying to remember who was the producer, and I said, do you want to go down as same as the head of A&R at Decca Records who turned down the Beatles?
It's true, but I also remember I was not even your first person asking, so maybe I was just hurting that you hadn't come to me first.
Sorry, couldn't hear you there, Andy. You kind of went out for a second.
Well,
it all worked out in the end.
It did work out.
I love this comment about the kind of the fact that even as experts inside of our own organizations, we have to encourage people to disagree with us too, which I think is really important. That we might be the ones who can explain why we're choosing certain encodings, but that doesn't mean we're always right. So we've got maybe the quickest of lightning rounds and an opportunity to share a great dashboard, something we're excited about. Anyone have another dashboard they'd like to add besides one you talked about already today? I'll hand it over to whoever would like to start. Andy?
I'll go. I don't have one dashboard. I have a collection of dashboards. Really, it's Mark Bradbourne's real world fake data project. I think Makeover Monday started in 2016, and that focused very much on remaking visualizations, but not really in a business context. And Mark's incredible projects. Mark, every couple of months or every few weeks, he creates a data set, it's fake data, but it's a business style data set, and asks the community to build a business dashboard from it. And they're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant, because you take one data set, and so financial complaints, not my wheelhouse, but you just see different people's perspectives on how to remake that data as a business dashboard. And what's really interesting is seeing how the design field has evolved and what people are thinking makes effective dashboards in the current day and age. This one's from 2020, as you can see, but he's re-kicked off the project, and I recommend you all go check out Real World Fake Data.
Jeff, you have a favorite dashboard you want to throw up there for us?
Yeah, the one I picked was done by a group. I was part of this project. I wasn't the only designer, but Chris DiMartini and I worked with a group called Splash with the Tableau Foundation on a project that they call Project Wise. It's around clean water for children around the world. And this dashboard starts, I guess they were very, very involved in the design of it, which was really interesting. They had very specific requirements around what they wanted from a design standpoint. The audience, they wanted this on a mobile tablet to be able to take across the world and show potential investors in their nonprofit. But we started with a set of maps that you could drill into that would give them their 5-year plan. Each year had the numbers of what they were targeting in each given year to accomplish over their 5-year plan, with a notation and some of the key statistics for what they were trying to do. And then that led to a outputs dashboard that we built with them around the students, specifically girls, because of menstrual health and hygiene and so on. But I loved working with this. This was a lot of iteration with them. This was an external facing dashboard that they were really particular about. The design elements of it. They were very involved in iterating with us. And then some others, Simon Beaumont joined this project later and helped take it even further. So it was a group of people. It was a lot of fun, and really loved the output from it. So, yeah.
Awesome. Steve?
And sparing use of color, which is a very common theme in the Big Book of Dashboards, and just love that. Hold on, let me share my screen here. So this one comes from Dorian Banato, a data visualization practitioner out of Romania. We have Daniel Zvinka, who's also out of Romania. I see him on the stream at the moment. And so I know two brilliant practitioners out of Romania, and that's my sample size. So I just assume anyone who does this from Romania must be friggin' brilliant. In any case, let me show you the work from Dorian, which was, he was tasked with remaking a dashboard for this French manufacturer of technical outdoor clothing. And this is what they had. And it's, nicely laid out, and kind of the boxes have curvy edges on them, a la what Steve Jobs would like, but it really doesn't tell you, well, where are you spending a lot of money and not getting a big return on your investment? So here's what he came up with. And this really fits into the real world fake data type of initiative. I want to do whatever I can to see that, Mark Bradbourne succeeds with that. It's such a great initiative. But I'm just going to mostly focus on the top of this dashboard here and explain what these things are. Well, he's using color-coded bands. Teal means conversion rate, pink means the conversions, gray means the number of sessions. And so what I can see here is, hey, a lot of sessions, very few conversions, leading to not much of a conversion rate, only 3.4%. Notice that the pink bar here is about 7, is about the length of the 5, but the number of sessions is far less, leading to a much larger conversion rate. And some brilliant work explaining what the bottom part means: detailed purchases divided by unique purchases divided by detailed views. This is the first in-bar chart that I've ever seen work, and it's absolutely brilliant. And here are the little red dots indicating, oh, you got a problem here. You're spending a lot of money and not getting a big return for it. But the thing that I thought was particularly brilliant is, this is an example Jeff put together in our Big Book of Dashboards workshops, where you have to create a dashboard and you need to show, how would you show that north is 95% of goal and south is 105% of goal and east and west? And you think, oh, well, that's easy. You just have this 100% reference line. But within minutes, attendees realize, well, are their goals all the same? Why is everything normalized to or relative to 100%? Shouldn't it be something like this? And Dorian has done a wonderful job in this compact space of, here are the actuals and here are the percent of totals. And I see this coming up so often that, here's something that I would absolutely put in the Big Book of Dashboards if we were coming up with a some type of thing, new version, whatever, of the Big Book of Dashboards. And this example is in the big picture. Giving myself a little plug there.
Love it. So. Thanks for sharing, Steve. As I was thinking of my example, I kept thinking of really cool dashboards, and then I thought, what's the dashboard that I've looked at the most in the past 2 years? And I have probably pulled up the dashboard for COVID Act Now, which is the simplest view of all the COVID metrics over the course of the past 2 years, more than any other site to check and see what's happening in areas around me. You can drill down to different counties and different spaces, and you're able to go ahead and see key information on different metrics. You also can drill down and see more trend information that's made available to you with some quick clicking and scrolling. And it's the simplest view I've found that quickly lets me see information that's relevant to me. And so that's why I picked it as one of my favorites in a world of spending way too much time looking at COVID numbers over the course of the past 2 years, more than 2 years. So as we go ahead and wrap up, a couple just quick announcements. Upcoming sessions of Church Chat Live. My 3 co-hosts will be joining you all at Tableau in May. I unfortunately am not going to be able to make that trip, but I hope that everyone who is joining Tableau will take the time to go to the Church Chat Live session there to see it really live on stage, which is very exciting. And then Steve, we have a very exciting June session. You want to give a quick shout out to what's happening in June?
Yes, although the URL there should be CC31, not 23. In any case, we will be speaking with Seth Godin and Jasper Kroom. Seth is spearheaded the whole Carbon Almanac initiative, and Jasper Kroom ended up in the unenviable but brilliant job he did of corralling all the people who were contributing charts and graphics. And how do you do that? And if you thought it was, something that 3 people were contributing writing a book, what's it like to have 200 people writing a book? You can find out. So June 16th, bigpig.me/CC31. I know you got other stuff to go. I've got to leave at the moment, and I need to start the after party, which I know you're going to talk about.
So we've got workshops. You can always find more on bigbookofdashboards.com about all of my co-host events and activities coming up. You can find more about Steve's upcoming workshops around the big picture at bigpic.me/June to go ahead and join one of his interactive workshops on the big picture. And the Outlier videos all got released last week. So if you haven't checked out the Outlier stream, there are 71 videos of all of our main stage content, free and open and available to anyone in our database community. So we hope you'll check it out. But with that, we'll go ahead and hop over to the after party to keep the big picture going. Andy, unfortunately, will not be able to join us today, but you will have me, Jeff, and Steve, who's gone to open up that Zoom room. So if you go ahead and go to the link for bigpic.me/cc29 after, you can go ahead and hop onto our Zoom room to open up a open conversation about all the things we talked about today, share your thoughts on dashboard definitions and everything else. But with that, we'll wrap up for Chart Chat today. Thank you all for joining us live. Thank you to my co-hosts hanging out here, the orange rooms. They're still floating around. And we'll look forward to seeing folks in the after party and hopefully live in May or for our great conversation with Seth Godin and Jasper Kroom in June. With that, we'll sign off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you, everybody. Take care.